Hello there guys, and welcome back to my channel. You may have noticed it's been a while since I've filmed my last video, but that's because I have been busy and filming hasn't been my top priority, as has been reading. I haven't been reading a lot, so it felt a bit empty to make videos without reading anything. Today I want to do a shorter video talking about the two books I read in October. I only read two, even though one was this giant tome, but yeah. So it's essentially a review for these books. I hope I can read some more in November, so I can feature some more books in the next video. But I hope you'll still enjoy hearing my thoughts about these both books, and yeah, thank you for tuning in already. So the first book I read was It by Stephen King. I wanted to make October a spooky month, read some horror and read some gothic stuff, so I could get in the mood. This turned out to be mostly reading It by Stephen King. It took me 3 weeks to read. It's 1160 pages long, so it's quite a giant book. But I enjoyed it a lot, and when I got the time between my busy schedule to read a few pages, I was always having a blast, whichever character I was following. And I think that's the main strength of this book. This book really, Stephen King really writes his characters really well. I've noticed this in previous works that I've read from him, most notably Under the Dome, that Stephen King has a really good understanding of human character. And the characters that were at the focus of this book were amazing and phenomenal. They really shone. I think my favorite were Ben, yeah, was Ben, but I think I loved a lot of the others as well. It was also their unity that was amazing, their unity as a friend group. That was so endearing and so strong, the way they were helping each other and always standing up for each other. Gave a true power to the story, and that's a big strength, I think. The other thing I liked was in this book that the monster, the It, was much more interesting than in the movies, in my opinion. In the movies he's mostly a clown that changes, that shapeshifts whenever he wants to copy someone's fear, but in this book he was much more ambiguous and like a true shapeshifter. The clown was referenced a few times in the book, but it was mostly a personal fear that he showed himself as, so almost no character saw him the same, which truly gave this monster another dimension to it, and that I really enjoyed in this book. It was more so a personal battle with this character, and not so much as defeating a monster that everyone can see. I also really love that the monster wasn't even the most horrible entity in this book. The humans were much more terrible than the monster itself. Beverly's dad, the set of bullies, and that one kid who hides stuff in a refrigerator. If you've read the book, you know, those are all far more terrible than the than the monster in this book, which was very interesting and cool to see. Another thing I loved was, although this book was long, it never felt long. It always kept moving forward, always kept giving more information to the story, and that was phenomenal. They are both written in similar sense in that they have a main set of characters that they follow throughout the book, but then sometimes they have these little divergence into different stories that at first seem to be totally unconnected, but then in the end add to the story and add to the experience of the story. I think this is because I come from a small town and I really like hearing folklore bits and bits of information from my parents and grandparents about how life was in the past, and they seem to make an experience that was trivial at first become a lot more dynamic and more dimensional. So I really love that books, and this one did that very strongly. As always, Stephen King's writing is phenomenal, not only in his character work but also in its language. It's very long and descriptive, but in a way that, for me as a person that finds imagining stories the most fun, he is the best at it, because he gives a lot of extra information that sort of adds to the story in my head and adds to the things I can imagine about the story. Other things to say about this. I think you should read this, and it's not very scary to me actually. It's more the end is very scary, and but it's more like a slow tension building scared, and rather than something that scares you all of a sudden, and it's like a brooding force that's literally and figuratively under the town. It creeps out of the cellars and out of the drain holes up into the city above, and that makes the story a lot cooler, having it drawn out like this. One last thing I wanted to say is that there's a scene in the back that I don't like, but I've read online that it's very unanimously disliked, so it just could be a part of the story itself, but that's okay. The story is still good. It's very much a must-read if you love horror, and if you want a long, slow brooding story that's written very good, then I really recommend it. And in my opinion, it's better than a movie. I've only seen the first movie, that is. And while that movie was phenomenal, I still think the story just is much better in this case, because it's drawn out and it has that village-like feeling that I told about earlier. So yeah, that was the first book I read back in October. Strange Case of Dr. Jekhyll and Mr. Hyde and Other Stories by Robert Louis Stevenson. It's a little bit harder to rate because it's a bunch of short stories, but I'll tell you some of my highlights, both of the pros and cons. I think what's safe to say is that the titular story of this collection was probably my favorite. The Strange Case of Dr. Jekhyll and Mr. Hyde was very interesting because it's, for a monster story, it wasn't told from the monster perspective, but from a best friend. So it was really interesting to see a monster story being told from a different perspective than from the monster. Maybe this is common in monster tales, I don't know, but it was really interesting to have the monster kind of be like a mystery tale, and have the main character slowly solve the mystery of this monster. I really enjoyed that part of it. It was really well written, and because it was only a short story, it didn't feel like any of the parts were extra. Everything just fit nicely on this the 60 or 70 pages that the story was long, and the language was a little bit old, but not in a way that is incomprehensible. It still felt coherent and beautiful. So for me that was a highlight. The other two short stories that I loved a lot was the Bottle Imp story, which is about a cursed flask being handed to several characters. If you held the flask, you could wish upon anything you want, but you would need to sell the flask to someone else for less than the money that you bought it. So I think the character buys it for less than 100, and then at the end of the story, the flask is only worth less than 1 cent. So it's interesting. It was a really good story about human psychology. See what is inside a character's mind when they would sell stuff like this and hand it down to other characters that they either did or did not know. And the other story I like was, I think, the Body Snatcher. I'm checking quickly. Yeah, the other story I really liked was the Body Snatcher, which was about a character heading into a bar, I think, to kill no, I really love the Body Snatcher as well, which was about the doctor school and about the bodies they do an autopsy on back in the day. Was also a small mystery tale. I really enjoyed the wicked nature of that as well. But there were sadly also a few duds for me. Most notably Drawn Janet, which was written in a very accented Scottish, but for the life of me, I'm not a native English speaker, and it was sometimes very hard for me to even comprehend what was being said in the story, so it took me a long time to read, and then in the end I didn't even find the story that particular at all, and there were some others that were just okay. So I think this collection does have some value in it. It's only 200 pages, I think. Yeah, about 220 pages. So it isn't that long, even if you don't like the stories. But I think it's a very interesting bunch of tales from this writer, Robert Louis Stevenson. I really want to read Treasure Island, which was also written by him. so that will be something for the future. But I rated this book 3 stars in the end, just because some stories I would give 3.5 or 4 stars, and some stories I would give even as low as 2 stars. So for me it's just an okay mix of stories. And yeah, I don't know if I said it before, but I think I gave it initially 5 stars, but I think I want to give it 4.5 stars in the end, just for the length of it, and sometimes it dropping the ball just a tiny bit, but that isn't bad. So yeah, those were the 2 books I read in October, yes. I hope you had a lovely spooky month and are having a really good November month as well. I hope you've enjoyed some happy reading, some happy horror reading, or maybe mystery reading, or anything for this time of year. And I hope you have a nice week, and I'll see you again in the next video. Bye.